This is what I am going to talk about is ocean pollution and some of the work I've done looking at chemical contaminants at the top of the food web in marine mammals and fish, which leads to my conclusions about the oceans being in crisis from toxic chemical, the rising level of toxic chemicals in marine species. And keep in mind, I'm working at the top of the very top of the food web. But I've been very happy to be on campus this week, and I've given several talks about the oil spill, and I think those talks will be available online on your website if any of you are interested in that particularly. It was a very just an amazing experience for me, and it's shaped it's shaped my whole life. It's really been quite an eye-opener to work in the Gulf of Mexico on that oil spill. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. What are the chemicals we're worried about? These are the persistent organic pollutants. Some of them are old chemicals. They're called legacy. They've been banned. The PCBs, the dioxins, furans, DDT, and other organochlorine pesticides. These were banned in the 1970s, but they're still around. They're in the food web because they're so persistent. They're such stable molecules that they get into ocean sediment and they just keep recycling. They cause cancer, endocrine disruption, and immune suppression, and a number of other problems. What I want to focus on today are what we call emerging contaminants, or contaminants of emerging concern. And there's two big groups of those. They are also halogenated. It's the brominated flame retardants, the polybrominated diphenyl ethers, or PBDEs, HBCD, hexabromocyclododecane, tetrabromobisphenol A, TBBPA. Those are just a whole group of brominated flame retardants that are used in all of our home and office products. I'll show you. And then the perfluorinated chemicals are the PFCs that are surfactants. And these chemicals are just literally in everything we use in our homes and in our offices. Like the flame retardants are in foam furniture, they're in hard plastic casings of computers, they're in textiles, they're just everywhere around us. And the levels of those on a trend are going up, whereas the banned compounds are slowly going down, PCBs and DDT. The brominated flame retardants and the PFCs are going up. These are the flame retardants we are in contact with in our everyday lives. You can see how commonly we encounter those, and all these products eventually, with wear and tear, break down, and as they do, the flame retardants become concentrated in dust. So a large part of our exposure is through indoor inhalation of dust, and it's also through ingestion through food. These are the PFCs. They're in fast food wrappers, they're in nonstick pans, they're in Gore-Tex clothing, they're in Scotch-guarded, stain-resistant coatings on furniture. So again, these are chemicals in our everyday lives that we are in close contact with. The PBDEs have been phased out, two classes of them, the penta PBDE, the octa. These are different formulations. There's 3 major formulations. 2 were phased out because of their persistence, their tendency to bioaccumulate, and their toxicity. This happened in late 2004, but one is still in use, the DECA. It's a fully brominated molecule, has 10 bromines. It's used in plastic casings, electronics, textiles, upholstery. There's It's complicated now, the regulations on these toxic compounds. You can see some states will ban some of them, some countries will ban them, but gradually they're all chemicals of high concern because of their toxicity. So DECA was banned in Washington State and in the state I'm based in, which is Maine, and I was involved in submitting data to the legislature in 2007 at the time that they made the decision to ban DECA. DECA is a neurotoxin, and it's particularly dangerous in developing animals and children. This is a diagram showing how these compounds get into our oceans. They certainly have arrived in the oceans. They're at high levels in marine mammals and fish. But you start with the home, or this could be the office. The products are breaking down. The PBDEs are concentrating in dust. We throw out our used sofa, our mattresses into landfills. So landfills are a secondary source. And after about 10, 15 years, all landfills tend to leach. So that goes to surface water. These compounds go through us into wastewater and into sewage. So wastewater treatment plants are another secondary source. And e-waste is a very large secondary source. When we throw our computers out and our cell phones and our televisions, winds up in these dumps, and we ship e-waste over to developing countries where it's recycled. There are e-waste recycling regions in China and Malaysia, in Thailand and other places, and these are highly concentrated areas for these compounds, and people are highly exposed, animals are highly exposed. In fact, around some of these little villages where this happens, there's almost no vegetation, there's no animals alive. So all this, because of our heavy use of these compounds in consumer products, they have contaminated every coastline in the US, and we did a study. I did a big review paper on this, which was published in 2009, about the contamination of the marine ecosystems of the American continents. So it's the US, Canada, all of North America. You find contamination in seafood, from sediment up to mussels, oysters, fish, and also in South America as well. So our work has been focusing on marine mammals along the Northwest Atlantic. The harbor seal is our major study animal. And this is, harbor seals are small pinnipeds that are distributed in the temperate waters all across the world. And we have a study called Seals as Sentinels that is looking at contaminant levels in the harbor seals. It's the first region-wide study of its kind. And we are studying, the animals are from eastern Canada all the way down to New Jersey on their migratory range. We're looking at both the old chemicals and the new ones. And the work we've done, we've produced a lot of publications and data, and all that is on the Northeastern website as well. You can access those papers easily. It's all there. Or you can contact me for the papers if you're interested. So the range, as you see, is from Canada down to the coast of New Jersey, New York. And there's believed to be two groups. Some of the animals seem to be stopping around here, and some of them go on up, but that is not well documented. But they're basically in the spring and summer they're moving northward. Some of them stop in Massachusetts shoreline, and a lot of them go up to Maine, where we are, to pup and hang out for about 6 months. And then in the fall, they make this seasonal movement back down to the warmer waters. This is the way the harbor seals like to hang out. They love to be together. They're often very crowded on ledges, and they tend to go from back to their same pupping ledges from year to year. They have a very strong site fidelity to their. They cohabitate with the much larger gray seals, and you see these guys in the front. The gray seals are as an adult are weighing 600, 800 pounds, and the harbor seals as adults weigh something like 200, 170 to 200, which is more like our body size. The harbor seal food chain is very similar to ours. This is the food they eat. These are the also commercially important fish stocks in the North Atlantic. Mackerel, alewife, hake, herring, and flounder and American plaice were the major dietary items. So when they're feeding, they're taking in chemicals in their prey. And that as animals feed up the food web, they're bioaccumulating and biomagnifying chemicals in their body. So these chemicals like to hang out in fat tissue, and so as you go up the food web, there's more fatty tissue in animals, and so there's more contaminant, and there's quite a bit of biomagnification as you get up to the top, and the top predator being the polar bear. But we put the humans in there somewhere because some human populations do eat polar bear, they eat narwhal, they eat seals, and then between the polar bear and the human, it's kind of a matter of who's eating who. Some people do eat polar bear, and some polar bears eat humans, particularly biologists. So maternal transfer occurs when in utero, in the womb, and through the placenta, chemicals are transferred from the mother to the pup, and this is true of all mammals. It's true of us. The mother can download up to 80% of her body burden of persistent contaminants to the pup during nursing. So when these pups are born, they nurse for about 4 to 6 weeks. They have a high fat diet. The mother's milk is about 50 or 60% fat, and they get a big blast of chemicals. Our work on the Maine coast we're part of the Northeast region stranding network. We do response to stranded animals along the Maine coast. This is a little harbor seal pup that died, and what we do is go and pick them up. Stranding and mortality of marine mammals is increasing in our region. You can see there's about a 60% increase from 1990 to 2006 in mortality trend, and for strandings that are up about almost 10 times as high. And we have very frequent strandings now of marine mammals. One of the things that we look at is the contamination of them. They are loaded with hundreds of toxic chemicals, and they carry such high levels. They're 1,000 times higher than any other animal alive on the planet today. There is no way that these animals are normal animals. So when we see a stranding, what we immediately think of is the animal, the resilience of the animals is weak. And something comes along like a virus or a bacteria, and it just wipes them out. We've just had a stranding, as you all know, of the dolphins off Cape Cod, and very often there's no explanation for the stranding, which was the case now. And the bottom line for this is they're so contaminated that their systems are definitely not normal for mammalian systems. So when we have a very large animal like this is a dead gray seal off the Maine coast, we very often will do the tissue collection in the field. We collect blubber, liver, skin, muscle, all kinds of tissue, and we send it to the lab for chemical analysis. And I'd like to share with you some of our findings in our studies. So PCBs, our studies are in the red. PCB levels in Northwest Atlantic harbor seal blubber are 54, 55 parts per million, and that's for adult males and pups. And that is actually, according to EPA standards, that's higher than what qualifies as hazardous waste. Hazardous waste is 50 parts per million in a material on a lipid basis. And we aren't the highest in the world. The highest levels of PCBs are in the Baltic seals, a highly polluted region. It's a semi-enclosed sea. And then also the Caspian seals have 72 parts per million. You see in the 64 is the Mediterranean. DDTs, the comparison is, if you look globally, our study is a level of 22 parts per million in fat and 12 for the adult males. And you can see that the pups are getting a very big dose, and that's what's causing their levels to be so high. Over time, they will dilute that somewhat. But the highest levels for DDT, of course, would be on the California coast, where we had massive spraying of the Central Valleys for agriculture, and then another high point is the Caspian seals, 143, is astronomical, and that's because of the continued use of DDT in Russia. So what about flame retardants? We've been studying those now for about, I'd say now, a good 8 years, and these are very recent studies, all in the 2000s, of different kinds of pinnipeds, and I want to show you the data. This data that I'm showing you, it's not only our studies, but it's the studies that we reviewed in the review paper that I showed earlier, and that paper is available. So our seals are carrying almost 4 parts per million of PBDEs, the brominated flame retardants that we use in our couches and our mattresses and our textiles. And so these compounds are they're increasing now in marine animals, and they're approaching the levels that we see for PCBs. Also, the California sea lions have extremely high levels. And you see, this is showing you in comparison with Europe, Japan, Canada, St. Lawrence Estuary, and Greenland. So we have pretty world-class levels for these compounds. When we published our paper, we asked this question: why do we need to flame retard our harbor seals? It's ludicrous. They're not going to burst into flame. What are we doing with these chemicals? We're pretty much overdoing it. It's because of our highly evolved society, and also the pressure from industry to put the lobbying pressure to put more and more of these compounds into our homes and our offices. So what we have here, our levels in us, in people, in Americans, are 10 to 40 times higher than the levels in the bodies of Europeans or Asians. Think about that. So they're very, very high in our seals. We found all 3 formulations, even the DECA, and we do have a problem of recurring disease outbreaks in this population. This just shows you the comparison of the levels, and you see the Northwest Atlantic harbor seal compared to the California sea lion. This is the highest level in these sea lions off the LA coast. It's 55 parts per million, or 55,000 parts per billion, as this is showing in fat. And the reason it's so high is that California uses much more flame retardant than any other state. It's completely they set the standards for the world, actually, in the use of these compounds. And these compounds are also now in dolphins. There are many new studies of dolphins, just showing the levels. You get the same, if you're looking globally, you get the same comparison. You can see the levels in U.S. dolphins and killer whale are quite high compared to the rest of the world, except for one spike there in the bottlenose dolphin in UK waters. That's in the North Sea. And this is what the pattern looks like in America. We again see the really highest levels are out on the California coast in the killer whales, but also in bottlenose dolphins along the coast of Florida, there are quite high levels. These killer whales are what they call transients, and one reason the levels are so high in them is that they feed almost exclusively on sea lions. The rest of the killer whales eat a lot of fish, big fish, particularly salmon. So the higher you are on the food web, the more contaminated your body becomes. We have mapped, there are many, many studies now all over the world showing the levels of these compounds. This is dolphins and whales in Asia. You can see the high levels off of Hong Kong. That's the South China Sea, highly polluted region, and that's also a major production area for brominated flame retardants. And there's some high levels also off the coast of Japan. But Hong Kong and that whole area, it's also an e-waste area. So it's become a source region for these compounds in Asia. And we look at what we call the congener profiles. I don't know if you all, not being in analytic chemistry, it might be, I know there's one person here, but I'm just going to make a broad point, is that by seeing which compounds, you see BDE47 is in the dark blue. That's the dominant compound in this profile of all the different PBDEs. This is what we call a penta signature in an animal. That means it allows us to trace back to the source, which is penta, which we have used so much of in America. So penta BDE is the one that we put in all foam furniture and everything. It's also now been banned. But in tissue, it can last for decades. This is the same penta signature we see in the dolphins. And these are, this is a compound, this is a DECA. It's a fully brominated flame retardant. It's BDE 209. And we see, DECA is very interesting. It doesn't move very well through the environment. It's so big. It doesn't move well through tissue. It's just such a large molecule. And it also is not so fat-loving as the other ones. It actually binds to protein, so it gets into protein-rich tissue like blood and liver. And in this case, it's found high levels in bird eggs. Sharks, a colleague of mine has found very high levels in sharks along the Florida coast. It was very odd because dolphins in the same study have very low levels. So what's going on there is a metabolism effect. Sharks do not have the enzymes to break this compound down when it gets into them, so they build up high levels. This is showing the same compound in terrestrial biota. You see it's pretty high in the birds. We find the liver is high, the eggs are high, and there's high in the giant panda from China. So some compounds that have been banned are being replaced by other compounds. Industry will start just using another brominated flame retardant when one gets banned, and it's just like we're always chasing after this replacement syndrome, and it's really a problem because the replacements are not any less toxic than the compounds were banned. One of them that we're starting to see now more of is HBCD, hexabromocyclododecane. It's a compound used in all the same materials that PBDEs were used in. So this is just simply showing that compound's now getting into the oceans, building up in top predator species, like the harbor seals from Europe have, building up almost to 1 part per million in fat, and then, the California sea lions and so on. So we have now recently analyzed our harbor seals for this compound, and we found really pretty high levels in the pups, and it's kind of surprising. So we're just publishing this data. In the same pattern in cetaceans, we're seeing this HBCD is now contaminating cetacean tissue. We look at the isomer profiles in the animals to see again, where is this coming from? You have the alpha, beta, gamma isomer for HBCDs. There's only 3 isomers, whereas for PBDEs there's 200. But of the 3 isomers, it's the gamma that is, when we see that, there's a very tiny amount of it, but when we see that there's a source. It means that gamma is in the commercial product. In animals, they get rid of it, and it's the alpha that builds up. So it's just a way of understanding what's going into the animal's tissue, what is persistent, and what is going to be the toxic issue. So looking at the trends, these are studies of over time, basically the same time frame, 1980s to 2000, and you see PBDEs have been increasing really pretty rapidly over that time frame and of 20 years, and we have ring seals, beluga whales, and this is a trend line for human milk in Sweden. In Sweden, they banned PBDEs very early. Sweden's very progressive in their handling of toxic chemicals. They have a program called REACH, which requires registration, evaluation, assessment, and so on. And that when scientists tell the government that the compounds look like they're problematic, they actually listen to the scientists and they ban the compounds. Here in our framework, it takes decades to get regulation. So Sweden, you can see in human milk, the levels are starting to go down. This is from our study, our review paper. You can see of marine species in the Americas. See how many species, from the crab up to fish, shark, cormorant, heron, and then up to the marine mammals, and then humans are the blue line there. All the trends are going up except for one, and that purple line up there is our study of the harbor seals. But basically, there's an exponential increase in these compounds from when they were started to be used in the 70s to up to 2005. The reason we think we're seeing a flat trend in the harbor seals is that we've reached such a high level. It's now at equilibrium. It's recycling through their food web, so they're constantly exposed, but the levels are so high already that it's flattened out. And we see that with many other studies. You can see in northern fur seals from Japan, the levels are also starting to flatten. Between 1970 rising, then in the 1990s starting to just flatten out, and this new compound HBCD is going straight up. In China, they're using brominated flame retardants in massive quantities. They're also producing them, and there's a very, very heavy marketing campaign for these compounds over there, and all the brominated flame retardants are going up in tissue, PBDs and HBCDs. So in the future, it does look like these certain compounds are going to be going, skyrocketing. If we see just to 2010, this is what we've been looking at, whereas you see the chlorinated compounds, DDT, PCBs, are slowly going down. And another group, the PPCPs, which are personal care products, those are containing things like phthalates and other compounds, BPA. The trend there is also going up. We have been concerned for many years about marine mammal mortalities, and since 1980 they've been increasing worldwide. We couldn't even get all the mortalities on this slide. There's so many of them. If you start with the European die-off of the harbor seals in 1988, that's when I started working on this. 20,000 animals died within a very short time, and it was a viral agent that was the direct cause of death. But when we did the tissue studies, we found that they had such high levels of PCBs that led to this whole idea that chemicals are reducing resilience of animals to any kind of disease agent or any stress that they encounter in the environment. So you can see they're just found in animals all over, and they're still increasing. This is a die-off of the harbor seals in Europe, 1988. It was a very large signal event. And what do I mean by that? Well, Rachel Carson wrote about a signal event and tied it to DDT. DDT spraying was going on. People were, children were out in the lawns, DDT trucks going through the neighborhoods, children running after the trucks because it was fun, spraying, all over the place. And then finally, the birds stopped singing, right? Many bird populations crashed. And this is like in the late 50s. Her book came out in 63, Silent Spring. That was the signal event for DDT. People started connecting the dots between all the applications of DDT and something happening. That was a wildlife species event. So now what we have are these marine mammal die-offs, and these are signal events as well. These are talking about, we think, PCBs, which are so high in the animal, and now the PBDEs. PCBs, DDT, the chlorinated compounds, now the brominated compounds. So another big die-off happened in Northwestern. These are recurring events. Lake Baikal, the Baikal seals died in 1988 as well. The Caspian seal died in tens of thousands, 1997 through 2000. They're still dying over there. In 1987-88, we had a big die-off of dolphins along our coast. Mediterranean dolphins died in 90 to 92. There's been an ongoing decline, precipitous decline of beluga whales. They are highly polluted with PCBs, DDT, other compounds. They are just filled with cancers. And along the our area, Northwest Atlantic, we started seeing the harbor seals die. There have been earlier die-offs going back to 1979, 1992 there was one. And these are right along the Massachusetts coast and Maine. But the thing is, this is a recurring problem. It's a recurring, very often, there's no explanation for it. There's no single disease agent. They all have something. They all are carrying fungal agents. They are carrying, you'll find 5 animals will be diagnosed with Brucella, a fungus. 5 animals will have influenza. 5 animals will have something else. But if you have hundreds of animals dying en masse, what is going on? Most of these die-offs, which are called unusual mortality events by NOAA, when it gets to be so big, they are not explained. So what do we know about the health effects of these compounds? A lot of studies have been just rolling in on health effects in humans and in animals. And I'll just call attention to two recent ones. The chemicals cause reproductive effects. They interfere with hormones. They cause, in children, cryptorchidism is it's a birth defect where testicles in boys do not descend. Hormone effects tend to go toward feminization. This is in people. Reproductive effects, it takes longer for women to get pregnant who have higher levels. And this was a very dramatic study out of Columbia University where I took my degree. Julie Herbstman, 2010, she found children that were exposed early in life to PBDEs had reduced IQ scores up to 8 points IQ at year 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. And her studies have tracked these children as they get now into teenage years, and they have high rates of infection as well. So all these effects they're cumulative. These compounds, like PCBs, target the thyroid hormone, which controls growth and development, including growth and development of the brain. So we link the neurological effects to the thyroid effects very often. Now, what's kind of new in research is that they're being linked to diabetes and obesity. In wildlife, the compounds cause reproductive failure, the same kind of pattern of effects, but in mink for some reason are exquisitely sensitive. They're more sensitive than lab rodents to PBDEs, and at very low levels, their whole reproductive system shuts down. They also are susceptible to, when exposed young, they have immune effects, which is developmental immunotoxicity, and immune effects later on, and then body weight reduction and so forth. So it's very similar for people and animals. Mink, very highly sensitive. And in birds, we're seeing DDT-like effects with eggshell thinning, delayed egg laying, reduced fertility, and lack of reproductive success. So we have, we're seeing this at levels that are environmentally relevant, meaning we go out in the field and easily find these levels of, say, this is not even unusual, 1,800 nanograms per gram lipid weight in a bird egg is very usual to find. And this is the level at which reproductive effects is occurring in birds. Some of these birds are just populations like kestrels, osprey, peregrine falcons. They're just now coming back from being wiped out by DDT. So this is a big concern. This is the effects in falcons and osprey. It's very similar, affecting mostly reproduction and at levels even lower than in the kestrels. So this is a study suggesting that PCBs in concert with PBDEs causes immune dysfunction in Baltic porpoises. This is recent data in seals that gray seals. This is simply altered thyroid hormone levels, and which affects growth, and then also in harbor seals, elevated in harbor seals, elevated T3, T4 in gray seals, but it still means that the thyroid's being impacted and it's not normal. Elevated can lead to things like autoimmune disease in an animal. A new study showing that first-year survival of gray seal pups is linked with exposure to PBDEs, and they were the major contaminant group. You find all these contaminants, it's a cocktail in the tissue of the seals, but we could single out PBDEs as the link, as the associative agent with the animal's lack of first-year survival. It could be, we believe, a neurotoxic effect or an immune effect, or a combination of both. So now these replacements are coming out. When we ban the toxic compounds, industry just simply shifts and puts out into commerce the chemical cousin of the compound that was banned. So we're now tracking what those things are, and are they getting into marine wildlife. These are what some of the compounds are. I mentioned the HBCD. It's also tetrabromo bisphenol A, a replacement for deca, replacement for octa, replacement for penta, and that is now has a new fancy name. It's called Firemaster. It's Firemaster 550, Firemaster 600. And you might wonder, you might want to ask, why are we putting these toxic chemicals into our lives? And that's because our regulatory system favors industry, over health and environment, plain and simple. Our federal law is the Toxic Substance and Control Act that was passed '76. It allows producers to market chemicals, put them into commerce without health and safety data, and without even giving the chemical name, and that's the trade secrets. And that's all this allowance for industry so that profit can be made. But profit is not going to be, it's completely not protective of health or the environment. And that's why some of people like in my field, many of us are starting to work with state legislatures to encourage the banning of some of these compounds. And also, when the states take the lead, then the federal government will follow. That's what's happened with the PBDEs. This is the DECA replacement, and that is now building up in herring gull, eggs from the Great Lakes, water birds from China, giant pandas from China. So it's out in the environment, it's getting into the oceans. Declarane Plus is in harbor seals and dolphins from Brazil. Firemaster 550, very interesting. We found there's two major compounds in that product, and we found both of those major dominant compounds. We found both of those in our harbor seals from the Northwest Atlantic. And this is Firemaster 550 in our harbor seal pups. We have our levels are low compared to, you can see Great Lakes falcons, Hong Kong porpoises, and so on. And that's just simply a matter, there's a big difference. These two compounds are TBPH, TBB. There's a big difference by region. And that's all about who's making it, who's using it, how much is getting into the environment, and where it's going. We found, this is the DECA replacement that we found also in our harbor seals, but low compared globally. And it's getting out there. This is for the, this is TBBPA, which we're now using instead of the Penta. And this is one that they can actually metabolize, but it's building up. That means we're using a lot of it. And so, thankfully, we're at the summary, and not too much technically can happen now. But just to say that these are ubiquitous toxic compounds that are found in all the oceans of the world. They are rising in marine species. They are at high levels in top predator species. There are large reservoirs now of these compounds in the oceans, like the PCBs. They're going to be recycling for some time. And if you think about all the land-stocked sources, all the landfills we have, wastewater treatment, so this material is going to be flowing to the ocean. Even if we stopped it all right now, we'd have a big land mass of it going into the sea. And the e-waste recycling is a big, big problem. We have now highly exposed populations of wildlife and people. And there's a huge need to do something about this. For industry needs to be pushed to find safe alternatives. There are alternatives. It's a matter of, but the problem is it's a profit thing. They're making so much money on these compounds. They can get bromine salts very, very cheaply, and so we're kind of in the grips of, it's a kind of a political, economic driver, not about environment or health. And these are all of our publications, which are on the website, available to you. And I thank my colleagues. I've been working with many, many colleagues over the world who are studying this. And here's my contact info.